In the quiet heart of Alabama, where dust clings to every memory and secrets sleep beneath layers of rust, one man's return home becomes a journey through time. After the death of his grandfather, a man the family dismissed as a dreamer and a failure, Malik Turner comes back to a forgotten house, a forgotten name, and a locked garage no one has opened in decades. But what waits inside is not junk, it's history. Hidden under tarps and dust lie two legendary cars, a 1960s Corvette Stingray and a Shelby Cobra, and a truth that will rewrite everything Malik thought he knew about his family. Through old letters, forgotten blueprints, and the voice of a man long gone, Malik uncovers a legacy of genius, betrayal, and pride. His grandfather, Earl Turner, was more than a mechanic. He was a creator, a man who built beauty out of metal and silence, only to have his ideas stolen and his name erased. Now Malik must decide what to do with the inheritance left to him, sell it for wealth or restore it for honor. As engines awaken and memories roar back to life, the Turner legacy becomes a story about blood, craft, and redemption. A story about how truth, like an engine long dormant, will always find a way to start again. In the stillness of a small southern town, two cars wait for a key, and one man discovers that some legacies are built to last forever. The road stretched endlessly before Malik Turner, shimmering beneath the southern sun as though it were melting into the horizon. Heat rippled off the asphalt, bending the air in slow liquid waves. The hum of the tires against the cracked highway was the only sound, broken now and then by the whine of insects hidden in the tall grass that lined the road. He had been driving for hours, passing through towns that barely seemed alive, faded billboards for Coca-Cola and barbecue shacks that had long since shut down, gas stations with broken pumps and hand-painted signs promising cold beer and cheap smokes. Each mile he drove pulled him deeper into the past, closer to the home he hadn't seen in years, and closer to the man whose voice still echoed in his memory like a ghost that refused to rest. His grandfather, Earl Turner, had died 2 weeks earlier. The call came from a neighbor, not from family. The rest of them, the aunts and uncles and cousins, who had long ago decided Earl was a failure, hadn't bothered to call Malik at all. It was the neighbor, Mrs. Henson, who had said softly over the phone, "Your granddaddy passed, baby," peacefully in his sleep. She'd paused for a long time before adding, "Ain't nobody come by yet to take care of things." Malik had known then that it would fall on him. It always did. He was the one who had stayed in touch, who visited when he could, who listened when the old man talked about engines and ideas nobody else wanted to hear about. The sign for Greene County appeared ahead, white letters peeling from years of rain. Malik turned down the narrow country road that led to the small town of Rose Hill, a place so quiet it seemed time itself had decided to move on without it. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the smell of pine and red clay. He passed a row of modest houses, the kind built by hands that knew how to make do. Then, just beyond the bend, he saw the house, the same white clapboard home where he had spent the summers of his childhood. It sat slightly tilted, the porch sagging, its paint faded to the color of old bone. The yard was overgrown with tall grass, and the wooden steps creaked under his weight as he climbed them. For a long moment, he stood there, hand on the screen door, staring into the silence that waited inside. The funeral had been small, too small. Just Malik, the pastor from the local Baptist church, and two old neighbors who remembered Earl as that quiet man with the wrench and the funny ideas. Malik had stood alone as the casket was lowered into the ground, the sound of the soil hitting wood dull and final. No one from the family came. They sent messages, excuses wrapped in politeness. "We couldn't make it down. Things have been busy." But Malik knew the truth. They had laughed at the man who'd spent his days tinkering in his garage, saying he was chasing ghosts. To them, Earl Turner was a relic, a man who had wasted his life on pipe dreams. Standing there under the gray Alabama sky, Malik had felt something inside him tighten a quiet anger, but also something else, something like guilt. Because deep down, he knew he had left too. Now as he stepped into the house, the air met him with a wall of stillness. It smelled of dust, motor oil, and time. The floors creaked under his shoes, Light filtered weakly through yellowed curtains, landing on the old furniture that had not moved in years. The kitchen table was still covered with newspapers, their dates faded into unreadable sepia tones. A cup sat by the sink, a ring of dried coffee marking the inside. Everything was exactly as it had been the last time he'd visited. Malik ran his hand over the back of a chair and whispered to no one, "Hey, Granddad." His voice broke the silence, but only for a second before it returned, thicker and heavier than before. He moved from room to room, touching the objects that had once filled the old man's days. The walls were lined with photographs, most of them black and white, showing a young Earl in a work uniform, standing beside cars, engines, and men whose names Malik didn't know. There was one of a younger Earl with a woman Malik barely remembered, his grandmother, Ruth. She had died before he was born, and the picture was the only image of her he had ever seen. She was smiling, standing in front of a car with her hand on Earl's shoulder. Malik's throat tightened. Even in the faded photo, there was a quiet pride in his grandfather's eyes. The more he walked through the house, the more he felt the weight of it pressing on him. It wasn't just grief, it was history. Every object told a story that no one had ever bothered to listen to. The family had long dismissed the old man as a fool who couldn't let go of the past. They said he spent all his time messing with junk in that garage out back. But Malik had seen the way his grandfather looked when he talked about engines, how his eyes lit up, how his voice softened, like he was talking about something sacred. Maybe it was junk to them, but to Earl it had been something else entirely. He made his way to the back door. Through the window pane, he could see the garage standing at the edge of the yard, a squat square building with rusted siding and a roof covered in pine needles. Even from here it seemed alive in a strange way, as though it had been waiting for him. The padlock on the door hung in place, corroded and stubborn, just like the man who had put it there. Malik remembered being a child, sneaking toward that same garage only to have his grandfather stop him with a quiet smile and a hand on his shoulder. "Some things you ain't ready for yet, boy," he'd said. "One day, maybe." At the time, it had felt like a riddle. Now, years later, the words carried a weight he couldn't ignore. As the sun began to set, Malik sat on the porch steps, the boards groaning beneath him. The evening air hummed with the sound of crickets and cicadas. He could see the faint outline of the garage against the darkening sky, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it made his chest ache. He thought about the last time he had seen his grandfather alive lying in bed, frail but still sharp. Earl had taken his hand and said softly, "You keep your head on straight, Malik. Don't let them tell you what kind of man to be. The world don't always see the truth." Malik hadn't understood it then. He thought his grandfather was just speaking in riddles, the way old folks sometimes did. But now, sitting here in the silence of that dying day, he began to wonder if there had been something more in those words, a message, maybe even a warning. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his cousin flashed on the screen. "Hey, when you gonna sell the house? Don't sit on it too long, bro. Ain't worth much anyway." Malik stared at it, his jaw tightening. He typed a reply, then deleted it. There was nothing to say that would make them understand. He put the phone face down and leaned back against the porch railing, looking up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to show, faint pinpricks of light in the heavy darkness. Somewhere in the trees an owl hooted. The night wrapped around him like a blanket, warm and full of memory. He closed his eyes and let the sounds of the countryside fill him, the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, the far-off murmur of a truck on the highway. This was the same night air his grandfather had breathed for decades, the same earth he had walked, the same sky he had stared at from that porch. Malik could almost imagine him sitting beside him again, silent but present. The thought was comforting in a way that surprised him. He realized then that he wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. There was too much left unsaid, too much he didn't understand. And somehow he knew that the answers he needed were not in Atlanta or in the busy life he had built there. They were here, in this old house that smelled of oil and dust, in this quiet corner of Alabama where his grandfather's spirit still lingered. He rose slowly, his legs stiff from the long drive, and turned toward the yard. The garage door gleamed faintly in the starlight, a dull reflection of the moon that hung low above the trees. For a long moment, he stood there staring at it. Something about that building drew him, like a whisper just beyond hearing. He didn't know what he would find inside, but he felt certain that it was waiting for him, that his grandfather had left something behind, not just things, but truth. He didn't believe in ghosts, but that night, as the wind stirred the grass and the first whippoorwill called from the woods, Malik thought he felt one close by, a quiet presence that seemed to murmur through the leaves. It was not frightening. It was familiar. It was home. When he finally went back inside, he paused at the doorway, glancing once more at the portrait of his grandfather that hung near the kitchen. Earl Turner looked back at him from another time, young and confident, his hands streaked with grease, his eyes full of something fierce and unspoken. Malik nodded slightly as if in agreement with a silent promise. "I'll take care of it," he whispered. "All of it. The house, the memories, the secrets. Whatever the old man had left behind, it was now his to face." He turned off the light and went to bed on the couch in the front room, the air still heavy with the smell of thyme and oil. Sleep came slowly, filled with drifting images of his grandfather's workshop, the gleam of metal, the sound of an engine roaring somewhere deep in the past. And as the night settled in around him, Malik Turner understood, in a way he hadn't before, that coming home was not the end of something. It was the beginning. Morning light seeped into the house through thin curtains, turning the dust that floated in the air into drifting flecks of gold. Malik woke slowly, his body heavy from the long drive, and the restless sleep that had been filled with fragments of dreams he couldn't remember. For a few moments he didn't move, only listened. The old house was breathing, the faint groan of wood expanding in the heat, the hum of cicadas outside, the steady ticking of a clock somewhere in the hallway. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of something watchful, as if the walls themselves were waiting for him to begin. He rose from the couch, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and looked around. The room looked the same as it had when he'd closed his eyes, old furniture covered in thin layers of dust, photographs staring down from faded frames, the air thick with the scent of oil and age. His grandfather's hat still hung on the peg by the door. For a moment Malik stood there, staring at it, remembering how Earl used to tilt it just slightly to the side when he worked outside. It was strange, he thought, how certain details could stay burned into your memory long after everything else had blurred. He brewed a pot of coffee on the ancient stove, the kind that groaned every time it was turned on. The coffee tasted bitter, but the warmth steadied him. He opened the windows to let in some air, and the morning poured in, humid, thick, alive with the sound of summer insects. The smell of pine drifted through, mingling with the stale air of the house. For the first time since he'd arrived, Malik felt something shift inside him. The sadness was still there, but underneath it was a pull and urge to start, to understand, to make sense of the space that had once been the center of his grandfather's world. He began in the living room. The first thing he did was gather old newspapers and magazines, their pages brittle and yellowed with time. They were stacked in piles on the floor, some reaching his knees. As he moved them, he found small objects hidden beneath rusted bolts, broken pieces of metal, and what looked like fragments of old blueprints. The handwriting on the scraps was neat, measured, the letters slanted slightly to the right. Earl Turner's handwriting. Malik ran his fingers along the lines, trying to imagine his grandfather sitting at the same table years ago, bent over the paper, working late into the night. Every room carried the same presence. In the kitchen, the cupboards were filled with jars of screws and nails instead of food. On the dining table, under a thin layer of dust, lay a stack of notebooks bound with rubber bands. Malik untied them carefully, and the smell of old paper rose into the air, a smell he had always loved, one that reminded him of school, of time slowing down. The first pages were filled with numbers, equations, and sketches of mechanical parts. Some were labeled with words like prototype and fuel efficiency model. Others contained lines of notes that were half technical, half poetic. Phrases like speed is balance and the body must move as if it remembers the wind. He frowned. These weren't the idle doodles of a man passing time. They were detailed, deliberate, the kind of work someone did when they were building something that mattered. Malik's heart began to beat faster as he turned the pages, seeing more and more sketches, car frames, engine layouts, diagrams of exhaust systems. His grandfather hadn't just been tinkering, he had been designing. In the drawers of the old desk by the window, Malik found envelopes filled with letters. Many were from the 1960s. Their postmarks faded, but still legible. They were addressed to Earl Turner from places like Detroit, Chicago, and Birmingham. Some were from colleagues, others from companies he didn't recognize. Names that carried the weight of history in the car world. He unfolded one with trembling fingers and read the first lines. Earl, your design for the exhaust valve is pure genius. I wish the higher-ups had seen the value of it when they had the chance. Malik sat back in the chair, stunned. His grandfather had been more than the family ever gave him credit for. He'd been part of something real, something that had reached beyond this small Alabama town. He turned to another letter. This one was shorter, typed on company letterhead, and it was colder. Mr. Turner, while we appreciate your submission, the decision has been made to move forward without incorporating your design. We wish you success in your future endeavors. Malik felt a sharp sting in his chest as he read it. He could almost see his grandfather's face when he'd opened this envelope. The disappointment he must have hidden, the quiet pride that had kept him from showing it to anyone. The room seemed smaller now, as though the walls were pressing in with the weight of memory. Malik set the letters aside and looked around again. Everywhere he turned, there was evidence of a man who had built and dreamed and persisted, even when no one believed in him. He began to understand why the family had dismissed him so easily. They hadn't wanted to see him. They hadn't wanted to believe that he had been something more than they were. In the afternoon, Malik found a box under the bed in the small guest room. Inside were photographs, black and white at first, then color as the years passed. Earl at a factory, surrounded by men in overalls. Earl in front of a car with a proud smile. Earl shaking hands with someone whose face Malik didn't recognize, but whose clothes and polished shoes spoke of money. And then, tucked at the bottom of the box, a picture that made Malik's breath catch in his throat. A young Earl standing beside two cars, one white and one red, their sleek bodies gleaming under the sunlight. The edges of the photograph were worn, but the image was clear enough to see the joy in his grandfather's eyes. Malik flipped it over. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "My real work." He sat on the edge of the bed, the photograph trembling slightly in his hand. The white car, the red car, they looked like something out of a magazine, machines of perfection and power. What were they doing here, in his grandfather's life? Where had they gone? His mind began to swirl with questions, but the only sound in the room was the steady hum of the ceiling fan, turning lazily overhead. He spent the rest of the day sorting through papers, cleaning the rooms, and collecting what he thought might be important. The sun shifted through the windows, turning gold, then orange, then a deep amber as evening settled. The air grew thick again, and sweat clung to his shirt. He paused often, listening to the creaks of the old house. There was something about this silence that wasn't empty. It was expectant. Every time he looked up, his eyes drifted toward the back door, where beyond the narrow glass he could see the outline of the garage. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, the house looked a little less like a tomb and more like a memory being put back together. Malik stood in the hallway, gazing at the small pile he had gathered on the table. Letters, notebooks, photographs, fragments of a man's life that had been buried under dust and indifference. He felt pride rising in him, but also sadness. No one else had ever cared to see this. They had written Earl off as a relic, a failure. But Malik could see it now, the truth that his grandfather had kept hidden even from those closest to him. He had been a creator, a thinker, a man who refused to let go of his passion even when the world ignored him. As the night deepened, Malik made himself a simple dinner bread and canned soup he found in the pantry. He ate slowly, staring at the shadows that the lamp cast on the wall. The hum of cicadas outside had grown louder, the rhythm almost hypnotic. He could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing on his eyelids, but his thoughts wouldn't stop. He kept replaying everything he had found that day, the letters, the sketches, the photograph of the two cars. Each piece fit together like part of a puzzle that was still incomplete. Before going to bed, he walked once more through the house, turning off lights, checking locks. He stopped at the window overlooking the backyard. The garage stood there in the moonlight, silent and still. It looked ordinary, but something about it drew him. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a sense of inevitability. He knew with the same certainty that he knew the weight of his own heartbeat, that whatever truth his grandfather had carried to his grave, it was waiting for him behind the door. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass and whispered into the night, "I'll find it, Granddad, whatever you left for me." His voice was low, almost swallowed by the hum of the night air. He stayed there for a long time, just breathing, until the heaviness in his chest began to ease. When he finally lay down on the couch again, the photograph of Earl and the cars lay on the table beside him. The clock in the hallway ticked softly, keeping time with the steady rhythm of his thoughts. He closed his eyes and imagined his grandfather in that garage, working under the dim light, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. He could almost hear the clatter of tools, the hum of an engine turning over. The image was so vivid that for a moment he thought he might open his eyes and find the old man standing there, smiling that quiet, knowing smile. But when he did open his eyes, there was only the soft darkness of the room and the distant chirping of crickets. Still, Malik felt something new, a pull stronger than grief, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Tomorrow, he decided, he would keep going. He would dig deeper into his grandfather's life, uncover every page, every note, every hidden thing this house still guarded. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he knew now that it mattered. It all mattered. Outside, the night wrapped itself around the house, gentle and heavy. The trees whispered in the wind. And somewhere in that quiet, Malik thought he could almost hear it again, the faint echo of his grandfather's voice, calm and steady as ever, saying the same words he'd said years ago. "Some things you ain't ready for yet, boy." Only now Malik was ready. He could feel it in the marrow of his bones. The house had given him its silence, its stories, its ghosts. All that remained was the garage, standing like a sentinel in the moonlight, guarding whatever truth was still waiting to be found. Morning came heavy with the smell of rain that never quite fell. The sky hung low and gray over Rose Hill, and the air was thick enough to taste. Malik sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the photograph he had found the day before. The one of his grandfather standing proudly beside the two cars, one white and one red. He traced the edge of the picture with his thumb, following the outline of his grandfather's smile. That look of quiet satisfaction had stayed in his mind all night, haunting his dreams, pulling him deeper into the story that the old house refused to tell outright. The garage had appeared again and again in his sleep, its door slightly ajar, light spilling out from within, a low hum echoing like a heartbeat. When he woke, he could still feel the hum in his chest. He knew what he had to do today. He set the cup down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked toward the back door. The world outside was drenched in the color of rust and dust. The grass was still wet from dew, soaking the cuffs of his pants as he stepped across the yard. The garage stood ahead, low and solid, its metal walls streaked with years of rain. The padlock hung like a relic, dull and brown with age. Malik stopped before it, hesitating for the briefest moment. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice behind him again, soft, patient, carrying that same unspoken warning. "Some things you ain't ready for yet, boy." He breathed out slowly, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. "I'm ready now," he murmured. The key he had found in the desk drawer fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along. When he turned it, the metal gave a sharp, reluctant click that broke the silence. Malik took a step back and stared at the door. The moment hung in the air, thick and alive. Then with a deep breath, he pulled. The hinges screamed in protest, the door groaning open inch by inch until the dark interior revealed itself. The smell hit him first, a dense, heavy blend of oil, dust, and something faintly metallic, like the scent of time itself. It was familiar, comforting even. He flicked the switch on the wall, half expecting nothing to happen, but to his surprise, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling sputtered to life, flickering weakly before settling into a dim, amber glow. The garage was a world unto itself. Tools lined the walls in perfect order, untouched for years. A bench stood at the far end, covered with papers, wrenches, and small glass jars filled with screws and bolts. Cobwebs hung like lace from the corners, glinting in the weak light. And there, in the center of it all, were the two shapes he had seen through the dusty air large, still covered in heavy tarps. Malik's heart began to pound. He walked forward slowly, each step echoing softly on the concrete floor. His fingers brushed against the nearest tarp, feeling the roughness of the fabric beneath the dust. He hesitated, his breath shallow. This was it, the mystery that had called to him since he arrived, the thing his grandfather had guarded for so many years. He grabbed the edge of the tarp and pulled. The fabric resisted at first, clinging as if reluctant to let go of its secret, then slid free in a rush, stirring up a storm of dust that glittered in the light. For a long moment, Malik could only stare. Beneath the tarp, gleaming even under decades of neglect, was a white Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. Its curves caught the dim light like the body of something alive. Dust lay thick across its hood, but the chrome still shone faintly beneath it, stubborn and bright. Malik took a step closer, his reflection warped in the curve of the fender. He brushed a hand across the hood, leaving a streak of clean white paint beneath his fingertips. The car looked almost new, as though it had been placed here yesterday and left to sleep. His throat tightened as he walked around it, taking in every detail. The narrow headlights, the split rear window, the emblem still glinting faintly on the front. It was perfect. It was impossible. Then his eyes turned to the second shape, the red one. He reached for the edge of the second tarp, his hands trembling now. The sound of fabric sliding against metal filled the space as he peeled it away, revealing the second car, a Shelby Cobra, deep crimson, its paint darkened by the years, but still fierce, still beautiful. The sight stole the breath from his lungs. He had seen pictures of these cars before, read about them in magazines, watched documentaries about their legends. But standing here, inches away from one from two of them, hidden all this time in his grandfather's garage, was something else entirely. He walked between them, feeling like he was standing in a cathedral built for machines. The cars seemed to hold their own kind of silence, the kind that spoke louder than words. It wasn't just wealth that his grandfather had been hiding, it was a legacy. These cars weren't simply possessions, they were proof that Earl Turner had been someone, had done something that mattered. In the corner beside an old workbench, Malik noticed a stack of papers and binders, yellowed with age. He picked up the first binder, flipped it open, and found what he had already begun to expect: design sketches, technical notes, and engine calculations, all in the same precise handwriting as the notebooks in the house. On the inside of the cover, in faded ink, were the words, Project Cobra Turner Modifications. Malik blinked, reading it twice to be sure. His grandfather hadn't just owned the car. He had worked on it, modified it, improved it. A wave of disbelief rolled through him. He sat down heavily on a stool, the paper trembling in his hands. Could it be true? His grandfather, the same man the family had called a dreamer, a fool, a relic, had not only been part of this world, but a contributor to it. He opened another folder. Inside was a photograph. His grandfather, younger, in a mechanic's jumpsuit, standing next to a team of men in front of what looked like a testing track. The Shelby Cobra was there too, half-built, surrounded by tools and equipment. Malik turned the photo over. Scrawled on the back, in the same firm handwriting, were the words, Shelby Plant, 1965. My last project. The realization came slowly, but when it did, it hit him like a punch to the gut. Earl Turner hadn't been some hobbyist tinkering in his spare time. He had been there at the birth of these legends. He had lived that history, and yet no one knew. No one ever spoke his name in those stories. Something must have happened, something that had driven him out of that world and back to this quiet Alabama town, where he had spent the rest of his life hidden away with the ghosts of his work. Malik stood and paced the garage, looking at the cars again, at the shelves lined with tools and spare parts, at the neat precision of everything his grandfather had touched. Every item had a place. Every screw, every bolt, every tool was exactly where it belonged. This wasn't the work of a man who had given up. This was the work of someone who couldn't stop. He ran his hand along the edge of the Cobra's hood and felt something cold beneath his fingertips. There was a small latch almost invisible under the paint. He pulled it gently, and the hood lifted with a soft metallic sigh. The engine beneath was pristine. Every part gleamed as though it had been polished just yesterday. A small metal plate near the front caught the light. Malik leaned closer. The engraving read, "Custom Engineered by E. Turner." The name burned itself into his vision. He felt something rise in his throat, a mix of pride and sorrow so strong it almost choked him. His grandfather had been here, had worked with his hands, had left his mark not in fame or fortune, but in steel and gasoline. This was what he had meant by my real work. The hours passed without Malik noticing. The light outside shifted from gray to gold, and still he moved through the garage, discovering piece after piece of his grandfather's hidden world. Old journals, receipts from car parts suppliers, Polaroids of engines mid-assembly. Each one was a fragment of a story that no one had ever told. He found an old radio on the shelf, the kind that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. He turned the dial, and static filled the room. For a moment, the sound seemed alive, as if it carried echoes of the past. He could almost imagine Earl here, humming along to music as he worked, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes focused, the world outside forgotten. When Malik finally stepped back and took it all in, a strange calm came over him. He understood now why his grandfather had kept his secret. It wasn't about greed or pride. It was about love, the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. These cars weren't hidden away as treasures. They had been preserved as memories, as proof that even in a small town far from the noise of fame, greatness could still exist. The sun was beginning to set when Malik locked the garage again. He stood outside for a long time, staring at the building, the fading light casting long shadows across the yard. The air was thick with the smell of oil and pine, and in that smell, he felt his grandfather's presence more vividly than ever. "You weren't a fool," he whispered. "You were a genius and no one saw it." As he walked back toward the house, the sound of his own footsteps seemed distant, muffled by the hum still echoing in his chest. The hum of engines, of memory, of something coming back to life after years of silence. Inside, he sat down at the table, the photograph still lying there, now joined by the folder marked Project Cobra. The two together felt like the beginning of an answer, the first words of a story that had waited too long to be told. He leaned back, exhaustion spreading through him, but his mind refused to rest. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would dig deeper. There had to be more. Letters, notes, maybe even something that explained why his grandfather had left it all behind. For now, though, he let the day settle around him like dust, feeling its weight and its wonder. The house creaked softly as the night fell, the garage standing silent in the dark, holding its secrets close. And somewhere deep inside, Malik Turner felt the first spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The night after discovering the cars had been a restless one. Malik had lain awake for hours, his mind spinning through everything he had seen and touched. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his grandfather's face in the glow of that flickering bulb, imagined him moving through the garage with that quiet focus, tightening bolts, sketching notes, wiping grease from his hands. It was as if the old man had never left. The house and the garage pulsed with his presence now. No longer relics of a forgotten past, but living testaments to a story Malik was only beginning to understand. By morning, the need to know more was stronger than ever, gnawing at him like hunger. He rose before the sun, the air still cool and damp, and made his way straight back to the garage. The light inside was dim and soft, golden dust drifting through the thin beams that leaked in from the high window. Everything was as he had left it, the cars sleeping under their newly uncovered bodies, the tools glinting faintly on the walls, the papers spread across the bench. But something in the room felt different now, less like a secret and more like an invitation. Malik poured himself into the space, moving carefully, touching nothing at first, just looking. The longer he stood there, the more he sensed that his grandfather had left the garage, arranged not by accident, but by intention, like a message written in the language of bolts and blueprints. He began to search through the papers again. There were notes on aerodynamics, engine compression ratios, carburetor designs, all in his grandfather's sharp, precise handwriting. But beneath those technical details were scattered pieces of something more personal. Dates, single-line notes, bits of thoughts that didn't fit with the calculations. Not theirs to take. Some things are worth losing everything for. A man's work is his name. The words caught him, burned into his mind. He felt as though he were reading fragments of a confession, the edges of a story left unfinished. Then, while reaching behind the bench to move an old toolbox, Malik's hand brushed against something lodged between two wooden planks. It was small and flat, wrapped in oil-stained paper. He pulled it free and saw that it was an envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with tape instead of glue. His grandfather's handwriting sprawled across the front in black ink. For the one who understands. Malik froze. For a long moment he didn't move, his heart thudding in his chest. It felt absurd, almost impossible, but somehow he knew this was meant for him. He peeled away the brittle tape and unfolded the letter inside. The paper crackled under his fingers. The handwriting was uneven, hurried in places, but still steady, still unmistakably Earl Turner's. The words began simply. If you're reading this, it means you found what I couldn't finish. I hope by now you've seen the cars. They were my work, my sin, and my salvation. I couldn't tell anyone, not even your father. Maybe I should have, but I was too proud and too hurt. You see, there was a time I thought I could change the way engines breathe, the way machines move. I thought if I worked hard enough, believed deep enough, I could build something that would outlast me. And for a while I did. Malik's eyes ran over the words, his throat tightening as he imagined his grandfather sitting at that same bench, writing by the light of the bulb above. He read on. I was a part of something once. Something big. They called it the golden age of American engineering, and maybe it was. We were young, hungry, building machines that roared like gods. I worked in Birmingham first, then Detroit, then down at the Shelby plant. I had ideas, lots of them. Some they used, most they took without asking. I didn't understand then that in this world, ideas don't belong to the man who dreams them, but to the man who can afford to claim them. I signed papers I didn't read, trusted people I shouldn't have, and by the time I realized what they'd done, my name was gone from the designs that were mine. The words blurred for a moment as Malik blinked hard, the ache of injustice radiating through him as though it were his own story. The letter continued. I left before they could fire me. Came back home with nothing but my tools and the two cars they said were prototypes. They didn't know I'd built them both by hand, piece by piece, using what they threw away. I guess you could say they were my revenge. I kept them here because they reminded me that the work was real, even if the world pretended it wasn't. You can't steal a man's hands, Malik. You can't steal what they remember. Malik read the line again and again until he could hear it in his grandfather's voice. He felt the burn of tears, but they didn't fall. He folded the letter halfway, staring into the air, his mind a storm of images, the young man in the photos, the confident engineer surrounded by machines, the quiet old man who had spent the rest of his life alone with his creations. He unfolded the page again, his fingers trembling as he continued. I didn't hide them because I was ashamed. I hid them because I didn't want them to be turned into trophies for people who didn't earn them. I wanted them to stay here, where they were born. I wanted someone, maybe you, to find them and know that they were real, that I was real. They might be worth something now, I don't know. But don't sell them, Malik. Don't let anyone tell you what they're worth. You'll know what to do when the time comes. The last paragraph was written in smaller letters, as though his grandfather's hand had grown tired. When you were a boy, you asked me why I spent all my time in the garage. I told you I was fixing things. Truth is, I was holding on to what was left of myself. But now, maybe it's time to let it go. You've got the heart for this, Malik. You always did. Don't waste it on anger. Build something instead. That's the only way a man wins in the end. The letter ended there, with no signature, just a faint smudge of oil where his grandfather's thumb had pressed the paper. Malik sat for a long time, staring at the words, the silence of the garage wrapping around him. The hum of the outside world seemed far away, the buzz of insects, the distant drone of a car on the highway, the faint rustle of wind through the trees. He folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. For the first time since coming home, he felt something more powerful than grief. It was clarity. He stood, his eyes moving from the letter to the cars. They gleamed softly under the dim light, alive and patient. His grandfather's story wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a testament. Earl Turner hadn't been broken by betrayal. He had built through it, defied it. He had turned his loss into creation, his silence into something eternal. Malik walked slowly between the two cars, running his fingers along their bodies. He whispered, "You did it, Granddad. You really did." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Malik cleaned the garage carefully, sweeping the floor, wiping dust from the workbench, lining up the tools just as his grandfather had left them. Every movement felt sacred, like restoring order to a shrine. When he was done, he unfolded the letter again and pinned it to the wall above the bench with a single nail. The paper fluttered faintly in the breeze that slipped through the open window. It belonged there, a voice preserved in ink and oil. Later that evening, as the sun slipped low behind the trees, Malik sat outside on the porch, staring toward the garage. The light spilled from its open door in a thin golden stripe across the grass. He thought of the years his grandfather must have spent alone inside those walls, the stubborn devotion it must have taken to keep working after the world had turned its back on him. He thought of all the nights the old man had sat there, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal, the hum of his own heartbeat filling the silence. It wasn't sadness Malik felt anymore. It was respect, deep and unshakable. The phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He knew who it would be. One of the cousins. Maybe his aunt, asking again about the house, about selling it, about splitting the profits. They wouldn't understand. They couldn't. This wasn't about money. This was about truth. He would tell them in time, he thought. But for now, this secret was still his to keep. As night deepened, Malik returned to the garage one last time. He stood by the cars, the letter gleaming faintly in the light, and whispered a promise into the quiet air. "I'll take care of them. I'll take care of your story." His voice broke slightly on the last word. He turned to leave, but something stopped him. A small box on the shelf he hadn't noticed before. It was metal, dented and dull. Inside were more photographs, but these were different. In them, his grandfather was older, already graying, but smiling again, standing beside the same two cars after they'd been finished. In one photo, he had his hand on the hood of the Corvette, and written along the bottom in faint pencil were the words, "For Malik when he's ready." Malik closed the box, his chest tight. The message was clear now. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an inheritance. His grandfather hadn't just left him cars or letters. He had left him purpose. The thought steadied him, grounded him. He turned off the light, locked the door, and stood outside for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. When he finally went back into the house, he placed the metal box on the kitchen table beside the other things he had gathered, the photographs, the notebooks, the binders. The pile had grown, and it no longer looked like a collection of forgotten junk. It looked like history. He sat there in the dim light, listening to the old clock tick, and began to write in his own notebook, the first words coming easily, as if guided by the spirit that lingered all around him. Earl Turner was not a man who disappeared. He was a man who built, who loved, who remembered. He paused, smiling faintly. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of oil and earth through the open window. It was almost as if the old man were there beside him again, watching, approving. Malik felt calm for the first time in years. The road that had brought him back to Alabama no longer felt like a detour. It felt like destiny. He wrote late into the night, long after the crickets had begun their song, and the moon had risen high over the pines. And when sleep finally came, it was deep and peaceful, filled with the steady sound of engines turning over somewhere far away, echoing through time. The morning rose quiet and golden over Rose Hill, and the air felt lighter than it had in days. Malik woke to the sound of birds tapping at the windowsill, their wings fluttering against the glass, and for a moment he simply lay there listening. The house that had once felt haunted by silence now seemed alive again, humming with the soft rhythm of morning. The letter from his grandfather still rested on the nightstand beside him, its folded edges worn from where he'd read it over and over through the night. Every line of it had etched itself into his mind. He could hear the voice behind the words, steady, kind, resolute, and he knew what the old man had wanted of him. It wasn't about the money the cars might bring, or even about the recognition Earl Turner had never received. It was about the continuation of a dream, about seeing something through to the end. He rose slowly and dressed in jeans and an old t-shirt, the kind he didn't mind ruining with grease. When he stepped outside, the air met him with that familiar southern heaviness, thick with the scent of wet grass and sun-warmed metal. The garage stood ahead, bathed in early light, the door half open as though inviting him in. He crossed the yard, his footsteps soft against the dew-soaked earth, and paused in the doorway. The two cars waited in their silent perfection, the white Corvette gleaming faintly beneath the dust, the red Shelby Cobra crouched like a predator ready to wake. Malik drew in a deep breath. He began by opening the wide windows along the back wall to let in fresh air. Then for hours he worked. He cleaned the workbench, scrubbed the floor, and sorted through the boxes of parts his grandfather had collected. It felt like restoring order to a sacred place, each motion careful and deliberate. When he came across a wrench or screwdriver, he could almost picture the old man's hands using it, the same calloused fingers moving with practiced ease. Malik wiped the sweat from his brow and smiled despite himself. He was learning his grandfather's language, the rhythm of his labor, the quiet patience of creation. By mid-afternoon, sunlight poured through the open windows, striking the polished chrome of the Corvette's hood. Malik climbed inside the driver's seat and ran his hand across the worn leather, tracing the stitching. The interior smelled faintly of oil and dust, and beneath it all, something unmistakable: time. He turned the key experimentally, knowing full well the battery was dead, but the click of the ignition still sent a thrill through him. These cars weren't dead relics. They were sleeping giants. He decided then and there that he wouldn't sell them, no matter how much they were worth, and he knew it would be enough to change his life completely. He couldn't bring himself to turn them into commodities. They were part of something larger, a story that deserved to be told, not traded. He would restore them, not for money but for meaning. It was what his grandfather would have done, and it was what Malik now needed to do. Over the next few days, he turned the garage into a place of work again. He called a local mechanic named Henry, an old friend of his grandfather's whom he found in a phone book that had been sitting on the kitchen shelf. When Henry arrived, his eyes went wide at the sight of the cars. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, running a hand over the Corvette's hood. "Earl Turner really had these sitting here all this time?" Malik nodded and Henry let out a long, low whistle. "Your granddaddy was one hell of a man. Folks said he was crazy, but I knew better. He was just ahead of his time." They worked together in long, quiet stretches, the radio humming in the background, with old soul music that seemed to suit the rhythm of their work. Malik learned how to strip an engine, how to test spark plugs, how to polish chrome without scratching it. Each day ended with his hands stained black and his muscles aching, but he felt more alive than he had in years. Sometimes when the afternoon light fell a certain way, he'd catch a glimpse of his reflection in the polished metal and think for a moment that he saw his grandfather standing behind him, watching. At night, Malik wrote, he filled notebook after notebook with his grandfather's story, piecing it together from the letters, the photographs, and his own discoveries. He wrote about the factory days, about the betrayal, about the years of silence and solitude that followed. But he didn't write it as a tragedy. He wrote it as a testament, story of perseverance and quiet rebellion, of a man who built beauty in the face of obscurity. Writing became a ritual, his way of speaking back to the past, of ensuring it would never again be erased. The family called, of course. They wanted updates, wanted to know if he'd listed the house, if he'd contacted an appraiser. Malik listened politely, promised he was still sorting things out, and hung up. He didn't tell them about the cars. He didn't tell them about the letter. This was something they wouldn't understand, not yet. It wasn't about the cars anymore. It was about everything they represented, the dignity of labor, the sanctity of craft, the inheritance of a soul's purpose. Weeks passed. The days bled together in the rhythm of work and memory. The Cobra came first, its engine cleaned, its tires replaced, its body waxed until it gleamed like blood under sunlight. The first time they turned the key and the engine roared to life, Malik felt his heart seize with joy. The sound filled the garage, deep and thunderous, a growl that seemed to shake the dust from the rafters. Henry laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "That right there," he said. "That's your granddaddy saying thank you." Malik could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The Corvette followed soon after, its restoration slower, but equally meticulous. When the final bolt was tightened and the last patch of dust wiped clean, Malik stood before the two cars side by side. They gleamed under the soft light, their reflections mingling on the floor, as if acknowledging each other after a long, silent sleep. He thought of the note on the back of the old photograph, "My real work," and for the first time he understood it fully. On the last day of summer, Malik decided to drive. The sun was sinking low when he eased the Cobra out of the garage, the tires crunching softly over gravel. The road stretched before him, long and open, lined with pines that shimmered gold in the fading light. He shifted into gear, and the car leapt forward with a roar that made his chest ache with exhilaration. The wind rushed against his face, carrying with it the smell of earth and freedom. It was as if time itself bent around him, collapsing the years between him and the man who had built this machine. For those moments, Malik wasn't just driving. He was continuing a conversation that had begun decades ago, between a man and his dream. When he returned home, dusk had fallen, and the crickets were singing again. The garage lights glowed warmly in the dark, illuminating the two cars like relics of some forgotten faith. Malik parked the Cobra beside the Corvette and sat for a long while before cutting the engine. The world was silent except for the soft tick of metal cooling, the same sound his grandfather must have listened to so many nights alone. He whispered into the quiet, "You made it, Granddad. I'll make sure everyone knows." Inside the house, he opened his laptop and began typing. Not just notes this time, but chapters, the full story, written with the weight of truth and the tenderness of memory. He gave it a name before he finished the first page, The Turner Legacy. Each keystroke felt like a hammer striking steel, building something lasting, something that could outlive him the way those cars had outlived their creator. As the words flowed, he felt the presence of his grandfather once more. No longer as a ghost bound to the house, but as a guiding force, steady and kind, reminding him that creation is the truest form of defiance. Outside, a light breeze stirred the trees, and through the open window drifted the faint scent of oil and pine, a mingling of past and present. When he finally stopped writing, it was well past midnight. He stepped out onto the porch, the night sky vast and full of stars. The garage stood quiet in the dark, its doors closed, but Malik could almost imagine the hum of engines still echoing inside, like a heartbeat carried through generations. He smiled faintly, the cool air brushing his skin, and whispered to the stars, "We're not forgotten anymore." And somewhere deep in the silence of Alabama, in a small garage lit by the ghosts of memory, the legacy of Earl Turner lived on, not in fame or fortune, but in the hands of his grandson, in the hum of restored engines, and in the quiet certainty that some dreams, once built, never die. If you enjoyed the Turner Legacy, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. There are more stories like this coming soon. Check out the next videos for more untold journeys, forgotten dreams, and powerful legacies. And if this story moved you, share it. Help others discover it too. Every share keeps the engine running.